our YouTube and Facebook channels. It's a great pleasure and honor to welcome our today's guest, His Excellency Mohammad Al-Tuwaijri, Minister currently advising the Royal Court of Saudi Arabia on international and local economic strategic matters. You are with us this morning as one of the 8 candidates to the head of the World Trade Organization, the WTO. So the selection for the next Director General of WTO is entering a crucial stage. Tomorrow, the member states will, or let's say, from starting tomorrow, they will select 5 out of the 8 candidates to go forward to the next step in the process of replacement of Roberto Azevedo, who resigned as Director General on the 31st of August. There will be a next round that brings the number of candidates down to 2. And finally, the new Director General should be designated by the end of October if all gets well. Minister Al-Tuwaijri, before giving you the floor, I would like to remind of a few short elements of your career. First, and not least, you are a Saudi Air Force pilot. You were active in the banking sector and had prominent functions at the Saudi British Bank, JP Morgan, and HSBC. After this, from 2016 to 2020, you were nominated as the Minister of Economy and Planning in Saudi Arabia, for sure, and currently you are an advisor to the Royal Court in Economic Affairs. So before opening this session to the questions, the electronic floor is yours, Your Excellency. You can take the floor. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Before I start, please let me wish that everyone listening to us today is in good health and coping with this unprecedented times of our life. So sincerely, I wish you all good. You mentioned the WTO and the process, but that's something that will take its course. We are here to talk about the difficulties the world is facing across the board. And in my mind, this awareness of these difficulties is super critical for the next Director General. Whether we look at COVID-19, its impact, its recovery, how the world will evolve, what are the trending issues related to this recovery, and even if we look at the picture in a wider way, economic volatilities, monetary policy is running out of tools, fiscal policies, how the stimulus packages globally are coping with this. So all these combined, I think, must be in full awareness for the next Director General and frankly, any policy making person globally and any international institution, because trade is part of total. And historically, trade has been a significant tool for innovation, for exchange, not only goods and services, but also ideas and culture. So it serves everything that's good in this world, you know, prosperity, it fights poverty, and it has very noble objectives. So I've always said through my campaign, when I spoke to more than 100 trade ministers from different corners of the world in the last couple of months, it was an extremely enriching experience to hear the vulnerabilities, sensitivities, how economies around the world are coping and struggling, and how the huge difference between approaches to the next phase that we are all facing. So this is very important to set the tone about my approach and how are we going to deal with this situation in the organization and global trade in general. You've mentioned a little bit about my background, which is in summary a combination between a chief executive officer, which many of you know, dealing with complexity, always require a lot of merit, accountability, performance, managing stakeholders, and achieving targets. This is very, very important discipline. And I've applied this discipline in my ministerial role as well, in one of the most ambitious transformations in recent history as Minister of Economy and Planning, to diversify the economy, empower the private sector, connect 3 continents, Asia, Europe, and Africa. Also empowering women is very, very important. So this combination, policy making, politics, private sector, agility, dynamics, I think will serve the organization in many ways. Here we talk about the design. So we're moving from the big picture to the candidate. Now we talk about the design of the organization. 1995, 25 years in my mind, every organization in the world, regardless to the external environment, which is severe in our case, must have a refresh, restart thinking. It's a must. So what about if it is the WTO with its 3 functions, negotiation process, dispute settlement, notification and transparency, and all of these issues have serious concerns. Things are basically not moving as members wanted to move. So this refresh is a must, and we should consider the external environment. We should consider every idea and solution that was presented in the last few years. We should also think about how the future is evolving and trending toward us. Digital trade, e-commerce, pandemic, COVID-19 in many ways have taught us that this is an important game changer. It's not gonna go away. And this file in particular must be in the heart of the organization because it will impact everybody and in a very significant way. So we look at the design and do look at the root causes of why are we stuck into this position. And the combination here to me is partially political. You know, there is the US-China disputes and tension, but there are many others. This is not only about the US and China, there are many others. COVID-19, people view it sometimes as an excuse, others view it as an opportunity, others actually are very confused. So how can we make sure that the organization truly plays its role as a North Star, as direction giver, as an entity where people refer to settle disputes, to think collectively, and make sure COVID is not an excuse, it's an opportunity, and provide the confidence and technical assistance for those who need it so they are no more confused. So partially political, but also I think another part of the problem is that there hasn't been a reform culture, no self-identification of issues within the organization. So hence my approach is around this practical leadership. We need to really listen to members, but be very impartial, give ideas. Delivery is the spirit. It should be there for people to really make progress all the time. And I'm a pro-gradual progress. We cannot have a switch on, switch off. This is something we should do based on evidence all the time. It requires a lot of rigorous effort. I have ideas around the Secretariat General office itself. I think there are great talents there and a huge amount of solutions. But how can we be more efficient in the Secretariat General to serve members, to serve the multilateral trading system, to bring people back to the negotiation table? How do we read early warning signs? How do we create feedback loops between prime ministers, trade ministers, ambassadors, other international institutions? Because I think the solution is global, and it must be global and stays global, at least for the next 5 years. So now we moved from the external to the design of the organization, to the Secretariat office. Now we talk about the specifics, how. The question really, after we know why are we here, the question is how are we going to deliver it? Here we talk about priorities. You know, the appellate body, which is being stuck for a while in a crisis for a long time must be revived. I know there are some ideas presented by some members, and I know where some of the tough positions around it. The question is, how do we really look at the rules, interpretation of those rules, the procedural issues around the appellate body, and also look at negotiation, because negotiation is the root cause, and the link, the pipeline of disputes is created by the failure of negotiation most of the time. Another priority to bring back trust, confidence, relevance, accountability to the organization. We must also finish some of the existing files that, from my understanding and talking to people around the world, is a must. We need to provide evidence to the stakeholders, to the community, to members, that we mean business here. Fisheries subsidies, e-commerce, trade facilitation, all these files has been in the negotiation table for years. So between now and when ministers meet in June next year, this is the ministerial conference, I think we should work very, very hard to make sure we provide the world with evidence that we can perform. And here I talk about performance and using deadline and using a lot of managerial tools to make sure that things actually progress. Third priority, after we do this root cause analysis and hopefully drive some of the files to the finish line and address the appellate body, we should all face reality. I think if we can demonstrate to the organization, to the members, to the stakeholders, to everyone who's observing, that the reality is that we have a member-driven organization, consensus-driven, very wide set of agendas, and the multilateral trading system is in many ways suffering, and people are moving away from it into unilateral and bilateral and protectionism, using every single excuse in the world. Facing this reality is a must, because even if we perform a little bit and bring some ideas around progress and really finish few files, this is not enough. We should really be thinking whether members like to have another round, how do we build on the previous rounds, whether it's time to connect more on global economies in a way that address reality, how this organization is fit for purpose to be able dynamically to cope with another pandemic, for example, in the future, to be able to really be the reference if the geopolitical tension is being wider or more intensive globally. How do we look at the organization's ability to self-identify issues? You know, all of this is very important to face heads on. And I think the Director General role is absolutely the neutral facilitator, the one who can broker, the one who can really reach out and strategize filling some of these gaps. But more importantly, he should be the guy or the person, he or she should be innovative, brave, and realistic, address issues that really matter and makes a difference. So it is striking that balance between all these variables all the time. So just to finish my statement, because I'm very interested in your debate and questions, I think it's a point of time where we have a window of opportunity. Maybe it's short-lived. I don't think it's going to stay for long. The pandemic, in many ways, yes, it locked us down in our homes, but also it was a great opportunity to reflect, pause, think about our reality, think about how we can collectively work together. This window of opportunity also, hopefully, will be a great tool to bring the relevance of the organization, the multilateral trading system, how it benefits all of us. The question is, how do we build the right scenarios, the right logic, and make a reach out program, connect the dots, and make sure we make progress. If we miss this window of opportunity, then we will be talking about a different set of challenges in the future. With that, I leave you with your comments, dialogue, and questions. So thank you very much, and I hope you all stay well.
Thank you very much, Minister Al-Tuwaijri. So in the audience, those who want to ask questions, please, you can raise your hands, electronic hands already on the screen, so I know that there are questions. But first, Mr. Tuwaijri, I perhaps want to ask you a very easy question, actually. It's what's your personal motivation to head the WTO? Why do you want, in such a stressful and complicated, complex situation, be the one that will head the WTO, which is today in a very clear and open crisis?
Thank you very much. This is a great question, but let me tell you also, the journey so far is extremely enriching. You cannot imagine what it means to listen to a vulnerable country or a small island, and they talk about their survivability, talk about their challenge, and how can you, with the right skill, with the right attitude, with the right motivation, bring hope to the world and to these vulnerable economies. You cannot imagine, if we succeed, what's the impact on prosperity and peace globally. It is an extremely difficult job. I got it. Very difficult times. The environment is extreme, and every sign I have in my mind tells me that things may get worse before it gets better. I have full realization of that. That's why I opened my statement by saying the awareness of the global economy and its difficulties is top priority to be a reformer. So you asked me about personal motivation. Look, I am approaching 54 years. I'm 53 and a half, going 54. I've done chief executive jobs. I've done ministerial jobs. I am very lucky and privileged person. I've made all my dreams come true. I love my family. I love humanity. I am self-motivated, but every job I landed to in my life was difficult, challenging, require a lot of ability to perform and stick to discipline. So I raise my hand for this job because I think the opportunity is real and the upside is possible and the hope is still there. So the fighter in me said yes, the chief executive in me said yes, and the politician in me said yes. And I think making a difference to the global community and really bring back multilateralism into the dialogue and make that impact short term and medium term and long term is very important for all of us. Innovation, technology, digital solutions. I like to be part of the solution all the time. So I think here the organization needs also this mix of skill, personal motivation. Finally, what I like to have is in a few years' time for the next director general for the organization is for someone to say, thank you. Here is an organization that is now more fit for purpose, more dynamic. I can understand the issues. We have ways to resolve them. And really negotiation is where people come to look at their disputes and settle them. So I hope I can make a difference, and I hope this self-motivation is something that will benefit the organization.
Thank you. Self-motivation and character is for sure one important point for this job. Another important criteria is for sure the countries, the nations. I mean, the World Trade Organization is a very complex organization because it assembles all those nations who have different interests. And you have, as a Director General, you have to bring those nations together. So what is your advantage or disadvantage, perhaps also, being from a minister of Saudi Arabia? How is this criteria of your country important and favorable for doing the job to bring those countries together?
So I will answer your question, and thank you very much. This is an important question. Although the position is about the individual, but you've asked very specific question. So the answer is threefold. One, if you look at the geographic location of the kingdom and our history, we've always been connecting East and West. This is our DNA, and we've demonstrated that for decades of trade and bringing peace, being always this neutral player in global economies all the time. One of our targets, as I said in my opening statement, is to connect Europe, Asia, and Africa. And we've published that, it's public, which means we have a lot of investments to do, a lot of infrastructure to do. We have changed rules, regulation to facilitate some of that. So this is one, the geographic location, heart of the Islamic and the Arabic world. Many nations, work around that, and this connectivity is something we're very keen to develop. Also, neutrality when it comes to US and China, for example, both are close partners to the kingdom. So is Europe. So I think also that neutrality of the kingdom in its trade and its relationship with the rest of the world is the second point. The third point is also, if you think about evidence, we have, for example, created a dedicated fund for developing countries that's been serving small, vulnerable countries for decades, Saudi Fund for Development. We've always had this responsibility in mind around helping and assisting. We've funded program around technical assistance. We've worked very closely with the IMF around countries in crisis and really helped and assessed through our history. Through our public investment fund, we've also deployed capital globally to make sure we are in the heart of innovation and technology. So we're part of this investment globally. So there is a lot of evidence that differentiate the kingdom and its candidate in the sense that what really matters to the organization, how this neutrality is important, how can the candidate reach out, knock doors with a way that people will listen to with evidence, how the kingdom itself has promoted itself recently, the G20. We've had the presidency this year and we worked very hard on the WTO reforms. And if you ask around about the Riyadh track, we've elevated this file significantly. So now we have political will behind the organization to support the reforms. So we've done that already. I've worked on this file since October last year to make sure that the dialogue around the reforms is really elevated to the political side, so we can use that card in the future to make sure people are committed to these reforms. Multilateral trading system is very important, and the kingdom is very keen to make sure it stays alive and work with the organization on that.
At the same time, you will have to face some very concrete questions. And one of those is the question of the appellate body of WTO that is dealing with the conflicts between members. This body, as we all know, is blocked now for many months.
Yes.
How do you, and this body is very important to WTO. I mean, it's really something that should work so that the WTO works at its best. What can you do? What is your proposition to relaunch the body, to so that the judges that are sitting in this body can be nominated again, are no more blocked? It was blocked by the US today. What's your proposition on this side?
So first of all, as we discussed, the Director General personally don't settle disputes. I'm not a judge. I'm a facilitator who really try to work with members all the time to make sure they communicate and they have the right dialogue and the right scenarios, so they see a bigger picture and always have an impact analysis. This is top priority to me. I think it's very important to work with members around the interpretation of the rules, around the procedural challenges. How can we bring ideas to make sure we make progress? For example, there has been a solid solution, natural solution by the EU, temporary solution. It doesn't resolve the ability body crisis all the way, but it was to make progress. So is it something we can try in a couple of files? Can we reach out to the US and others to make sure, you know, we make progress again using this solution? And if it's not the case, we will present a full case around what are the alternatives. Also, David Walker, the General Counsel, have put a full detailed analysis around the appellate body and its impact. So the question is, why hasn't these solutions moved on and we are stuck for months? Now there is the political beast, as I said, and you know, this is a question of reach out, knock the door, strategize, etc., etc. But what I can do is work around the appellate body crisis with members continuously, rigorously. Objective 1, make progress. Objective 2, present the impact analysis in a way that's understandable and sensible to all members. Objective 3, also build the strategic solution, which is negotiation. This is where the root cause of everything. This is where we should look at to make sure that we don't have this kind of crisis again. And I will be also very straightforward here. This is not about having a magic stick and saying this will be resolved by X day in this way. This is a process. This is tough. This has a mix of politics, technicalities, procedural, interpretation. So we have to break it into pieces to make sure we make progress again.
Thank you. Many analysts say that there is no way to succeed as a Director General without having the support of the United States. Do you agree with this?
Look, United States is a big member and it has a significant share of global trade. I think the United States business in particular is very keen to see the organization back to its relevance, and so is the other big members. I think the objective of the Director General is to make sure the US is back to the table in a way that addresses their concern, but also use every single opportunity and tool to make sure this is balanced. We have to strike that balance all the time, rigorously, with commitment. So I want to be that committed person to this all the time. Now, succeed, no succeed, viewpoints. Some analysts also say it is a great opportunity. There is only upside here. There is no downside because we've hit the bottom. So how do you really take both schools and make sure you focus? The question is how to focus and speak to all stakeholders in the US business matter. And, you know, the administration, I'm sure, at least from the discussions in the G20, have actually put some ideas around reforms. There has been recent statements by USTR around reforms. So how can we also use members' influence, other members' influence who are like-minded and towards solutions? So it's multiple tools all the time to make sure the US is back into the organization to negotiate. That is the objective. Now, there will be a lot of challenge doing that, but I just told you, this is not only about the US. This is multiple in many areas, in many disputes. Some of them are not visible yet. So the Director General, in my mind, should definitely be the person who listens, facilitates, be a deal maker, yes, but also innovative, creative, and bold, and push the envelope. I think that striking that balance in a member-driven organization, consensus, is not easy. But this is the environment. We should really match how the environment is telling us to have this job also elevated and escalated to make sure members' goals are achieved.
Yeah, you mentioned before the tensions, US-China tensions for sure, and underscoring that for sure it's not the only tensions that are existing today in the trade world. And what we see that it is very generally, tensions are stronger and stronger, that COVID-19 is just adding a new layer of those tensions because economies of each countries are becoming scarcer, and the gap between developing world and the industrialized will probably even widen. So the challenge is really huge. Do you expect this kind of climate of growing tensions to go on? And what's your view of the next 5-10 years of the economic relations in this globalized world?
Look, I like to be practically optimistic. That's my position. I like to be practically optimistic in the sense that if you look at every crisis that took place in the last 30 years, and I have full understanding that most of them were either geography specific or, you know, product specific, credit, liquidity, currency, etc. This one is different. It's everybody at the same time, and there is a lot of unknowns. No vaccine on the horizon. The stimulus packages may not be enough. And you're absolutely right. It created a huge gap between developed and developing countries. And most of the members of the organization are probably into the developing phase. So, and the organization haven't really reacted in a way to really match the challenge externally. So the issue is multiple dimension. And now I do also understand practically that with this size of challenge of the pandemic, people initially got a shock and panic. You know, you understand that you want to protect your own backyard and citizens immediately because it's life-threatening, unknowns. But the more people rationalize, the more people start to think about the long-term impact. And we've seen that again in the G20 summit. We've put a package around economic recovery globally in a coordinated way. And every crisis, people rationalize ultimately to either think about how they cooperate, coordinate in a better way. I think this one is no different. Maybe with the right analysis, with the right scenarios, with the right use of information, data, and, you know, think of it as a case. The Director General should be the person who, you know, talk about it and own it as someone who really tried to bridge some of these gaps. I think we can achieve something. As I said, some people view it as an excuse. Some say it's an opportunity. Some are confused. I think let's play on the opportunity here. And, you know, there are issues with healthcare supply, food security. I think these may stay longer with us because of the nature of the pandemic. But ultimately, we should think about impact, SMEs, how jobs are being lost in hundreds of millions, how sectors have been hurt, you know, hospitality, tourism, etc., how the organization itself, WTO, can connect with other international institutions to have a comprehensive business case. As I said, the pandemic did not hit trade alone. There is huge social impact. There is massive job losses. You know, we should work with everyone around the solution. That is how credibility is built. So I would say if we can do all of this and do it quickly, we may get hope rather than confusion into the system.
Thank you. I can see that there are journalists on Zoom. So if you have any questions, please raise your hands. And there is a little arrow on the right side of your screen. Raise your hands, and we'll give you the floor. In the meantime, Minister Al-Tuwaijri, one more question, perhaps, on the sense of what is WTO. WTO today is considered as a kind of incarnation of a global world and totally interconnected world. But if we look at what's going on in the streets, in Europe, in the United States, a little bit everywhere, this way of this globalized world is put in question because many think in the population, the civil society, that to protect our planet, because of climate warming, international trade should actually slow down. Is this something that you are considering? Is this slowing down of international trade? Is this something that fits into your way of thinking? Or is it just a kind of fashion thinking today? How you feel that?
I think about it practically. Again, I think the issue of the environment is very serious. The correlation between trade and the environment is very visible to me. And, you know, if we're talking about this particular file, then I think the issue is transition. How do we actually transit from here to where the objectives, unified definition of what environment should look like, you know, built on the SDG goals, which has been there around us for some time, connect those dots between the original goals of the WTO and the SDG agendas, and elevate. We have a committee in the WTO, it should be elevated, I think, provided with more technical assistance and address the viewpoints of everybody. So use the private sector also in their story and what it means. SMEs, some countries are really vulnerable when it comes to the environment. I think this is a very important file. The WTO itself is not an environmental entity, but it can definitely be part of the solution. So I see the relationship, and again, we should practically think about it. This is not about a viewpoint at some point of time. It's something that's with us, it's real, and we should consider it as part of our journey toward multilateral trading system. Now, on the other hand, I hear also a lot of views around the relevance of the organization. It's the only entity in the world where people should talk, negotiate, settle disputes. The alternative is not good, and we don't have it anyway. So everything I have in mind is around progress and transition. So if the world, if members want to have a new version of the WTO in 10 years' time, let's talk about it. You know, members should talk about it, negotiate. If they want to have another round to discuss rules, let's talk about it. You know, my job is to make sure that these views are listened to, addressed, and really challenged as well, using data, information, using solution scenarios, connect with other international institutions, with people like you, because you also have your own independent views. Think tanks, media, subject matter experts, all the time. So my friend, what I want to have is, there is no bad idea at all. There is process. We should think about how do we grasp and, you know, every idea in our culture, so it actually get addressed and people feel comfortable with the organization to address those ideas.
There is a wide part of economy that hasn't until today really be considered by the WTO. It's all about e-commerce, and regulations in e-commerce for the moment are really to be developed. What is your view about e-commerce? How can you engage in this process of having new rules for a very different world that is the e-commerce world? How are we going to manage with this, knowing that it's already very difficult to manage the regular international trade?
So, you know, the file has been within the WTO since 1998. The e-commerce file has been there since then. And at that point of time, the organization was actually ahead of the curve. But you're absolutely right. Nothing really happened in a significant way to make an impact. The issue with e-commerce is its diversity. This is not only about buy and sell, it's also have a full ecosystem around it. There are many sectors associated to it. There is data privacy, there is security, there is cyber, and there is technical capabilities and capacities. Different countries have different views about it. So that's why I said, you know, the organization should be able to elevate those files internally and put them on a track with the right skills inside, and be able for the organization itself to use digital trade. Unfortunately, during COVID, it was a difficulty for the organization. It wasn't really ready for the way it should be ready. Yeah. So it's a dilemma of how do you address this game changer into an organization that could not deal with basics and itself cannot really use technology in a way that is satisfactory to members. So the question here is, again, is around negotiation, dialogue, how to facilitate those ideas and how to make progress. Plurilateralism is one idea that, you know, I probably think about very seriously and work with members around it. I don't expect a full solution immediately. This is a journey of multilateralism, and this particular file may be through plurilateralism. There are very sensitive issues around taxation and others, and very wide viewpoints. So how can we really make progress to bring relevance to the organization in this very important file? But my role will be this innovative ideas and really try to push this file elevated where it should be and deserved in the organization.
So you will come to and settle in Geneva if you, let's say, you are selected as the Director General of WTO. WTO is one of the very big organizations in Geneva, in this multilateral Geneva. How do you feel Geneva as being the good place for this type of, still the good place for this type of organization? And what are the relations with the center of the UN in New York? I mean, do you think Geneva has still the power it had for 20 years ago when WTO was launched here?
My objective would be to connect the organization. This is my objective. When I say connect, and I said this already, I want to have a program of reach out to the decision makers around the world. This is very, very important, rather than the physical location of the organization. We're in a technology world, my friend. And, you know, the political beast around us is around really reaching out to prime ministers, heads of states, and knock the door, strategize gaps as much as possible. So that's one. I also want to connect the organization to other international institutions. As I said, you know, the solution should be global. Trade is like the spinal cord in the body. It's everywhere. It feeds. It's important to every single organ of the global economy. That's fine. But we also have to understand the job market, the intellectual property, the finance. Trade finance is now becoming also a big challenge. So we need to connect those dots, and we need to strike the balance between the vulnerable countries, the least developed countries, and the big economies. We need to understand impact. My priority is to connect rather than where the organization is. So if I can imagine where my time is in 2 years' time, after we really gets our hand dirty to make sure we bring relevance and trust and confidence, I think at least 50% of my time will be reaching out to capitals around the world and have this constructive dialogue around the reforms, which should be continuous. This is not something we can do one-off. This is a continuous process. I want to have consistent messaging between decision makers and Geneva. And I want to work with other international institutions around the world. So I'm not really bothered about this at all. It's the question is, how can you deliver on the objectives of the organization and members?
Thank you. So, and perhaps to conclude this this conversation, I would like to ask you, the WTO, how you see it today. What are, in your views, the two strengths, the two greatest strengths of the organization, and also the two strongest weakness of this organization today.
So the two strength is that the organization have made a lot of impact already on global trade. It's still the only entity in the world that people need to refer to if there is a negotiation or dispute. It really matters to a wide range of stakeholders from members, countries, private sector, and so on. So organization is there, it's existing, it's live, it's relevant, it has a great history. And the second one is, I think the upside of the organization is significant. We can really have this optimistic hope that we can revive it and we can bring it back to life, because we can build on this great experiences around it and talents and success stories, although they are small and they are probably historical now, but they exist. Weaknesses, I think this consensus, member-driven definition of consensus, how do you look at it? Everyone has veto, etc., etc. We can definitely work around solutions to really define it and make sure we make progress through plurilaterals and other ideas that prove to be effective. So the design, in many ways, is pulling the organization a little bit back. The second thing, I think, is the organization hasn't really built itself around this kind of environment. It built itself around, an entity where people can go and negotiate and think they can settle disputes. But it wasn't fit for purpose in a situation like this, which will be staying with us for a long time. So readiness of the organization to cope with reality, with real economies, is a very serious weakness.
Thank you very much. So I don't know if I can see names of journalists in our Zoom audience. Are there any more questions? We are open to questions for sure before closing down this press conference. Any more questions? If there is no question, I would really first ask you, Mr. Mohammad Al-Tuwaijri, if you have one more remarks you would really make, and that is very important to you. You have something more to tell?
I think it's a crossroad. It's a point of our life in the economic era and the trade era that will change everything we know about trade, about global economies. It's a crossroads in any way you look at it. It's also a window of opportunity to bring back the multilateral trading system to life and insist on this journey. Use every single opportunity, use every single mind to make sure this organization is relevant. If we miss it, it's short-lived. I think we will have to deal with a much worse scenario in the years to come. And the choice of the Director General, I hope, is about this practicality, awareness, leadership, ability to knock doors, strategize, bring dynamics, agility, performance, delivery to the organization. My ultimate wish is for the organization to really have the right person for the next 4 years, because it's going to be a game changer. But I again thank you for your interview, for your questions, for your dialogue. I wish everybody stays healthy, and let's see how things go between now and next week. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And so this is your conclusion, our conclusion of this press conference with the Minister Advisor to the Royal Court of Saudi Arabia, Mr. Mohammad Al-Tuwaijri, who is a candidate to the head of WTO. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. It was very interesting. And I wish you and to all of the candidates an interesting and fruitful campaign. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.